Hey everybody, KMO here. I took a poll today for the New York Times. It took a long time to take the poll. At the very beginning they suggested that I use a computer or a tablet. I did it on my phone. Why? Because I was sitting in an easy chair and I had my phone in my hand, and using either of the other two options would have meant getting up, which I wouldn't really be ready to do until I had finished my cup of coffee. So I took the poll, and I will pause now for the airplane. So I took the New York Times poll and, admitted that I was not a subscriber. I have, an online account with them, but I don't pay for their content. So whenever I reach the monthly limit for their stories, which I think is 5, I just stop. Many's the month that I don't even reach that 5-story limit. So I can't say that I'm plugged in with much enthusiasm to the New York Times, but I do check on it from time to time. As Noam Chomsky says, you don't go to the New York Times for the truth. You go to the New York Times for the official line. To see what it is that Upper East and West Side Manhattaners are expected to buy into. What narrative they are expected to accept and propagate. That's the value of the New York Times. And they also have money, so they can pay to have reporters on the ground in various places rather than relying on secondhand reporting, which so many news outlets have to do. But that got me thinking about, I'll give you a little information about the poll. They ask a lot of information. They ask a lot of information about the devices that I use, the services that I use, how New York Times stories make it to my, my screen or to my attention. And then they also ask me to rank a lot of statements. Saying either I agree, strongly agree, somewhat agree, that sort of thing. Or they'll give me 3 and I'll pick the most valuable among them, or the one that I agree with the most among them. So when they're presenting statements, some of the statements were, I prefer media that challenges my, my pre-existing commitments. And I'm paraphrasing. I don't know what their exact wording was, but something like that. Something that challenges my worldview. Or I want information that I know is not biased by corporate sponsorship. Or one thing that they kept throwing up there again and again, wanting me to rank it in comparison to other things, was I want to be up to date. I want to stay informed. And I always, they were only asking you to pick the most important of the 3 rather than ranking them. But had I been ranking them, I always would have put that one at the very bottom. Staying up to date, staying informed is not in any way a priority for me, except on, certain subjects that I'm particularly interested in, like, if a movie that I want to do well and hope gets a sequel, I'm going to follow how it does in the box office the first weekend, because that really determines whether or not it's going to get a sequel. Or, at least a sequel that comes earlier than, say, 30 years later, as with the case of Blade Runner 2049. But for the most part, the newer the information, the less it's worth. What do I mean? I was thinking back to Saturday, December 13th, 2003. It was a Saturday, and I was looking forward to listening to that week's installment of This American Life. I had dial-up internet at the time. It was not suitable for downloading or, streaming audio content. Not even sure if This American Life was on the web at that point. So I was really looking forward to it. I really liked that show. And NPR went to special coverage that day because Saddam Hussein, after 9 months on the run, had been captured. He'd been found in what was called a spider hole. And during the time that I wanted to be listening to This American Life, NPR, in its special coverage, went from bureau to bureau and expert to expert, and everybody said the exact same thing. They repeated the scant handful of facts that were known about the situation, and then just repeated, we're waiting for more information. We don't know anything more than that. We'll let you know as soon as we know more. That's not useful. All that really does is say to the listener, look, don't bother going elsewhere. Don't tune away. Don't tune us out looking for more current information. We're giving you as much as anybody knows, which is to say, stick with us. You could learn way more, substantially more, about the events of that day by going to the Wikipedia page for Saddam Hussein and reading that section of the page in 2019 than you could have learned in listening to NPR's special coverage for several hours on the actual day. News that is new, the latest, on whatever topic hasn't been vetted, certainly hasn't been vetted for any length of time. Largely, it is what anybody can see in the moment will be it'll be conditioned, not determined, it'll be conditioned by what they expect. Because what they expect will have an influence on, what they're looking for, what they're paying attention to. Certain things you just can't say. And it takes a long time for the obsessions and the commitments and, the power dominance of the current moment to give way so that certain narratives can, break above the surface. So I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and I will freely admit, I see it as a weakness, but if I'm looking at nonfiction books and I'm trying to decide, what I'm going to listen to next, the year of publication makes a difference, and I favor the new. Which, if you go, and I haven't read a whole lot of ancient Greek or Roman literature, just what I got in various survey courses in college. I haven't sought it out on my own for the most part. But you go and you read Cicero or Marcus Aurelius, and what you'll find is that there's a lot more that is constant about the human condition than has changed. Change in the human condition mostly comes from changes in technology. So yeah, they didn't have industrialism as we know it. They certainly didn't have mechanized, fossil fuel-powered industrialism in the days of Marcus Aurelius. But they had agriculture, they had taxation, they had advertising, they had sports, they had political intrigue, they had political power struggles, they had war. And they had all the petty bullshit that goes on in people's lives today. The gossip wasn't superpowered by social media, but there was still plenty of it. And it had the same effects, psychologically, socially, in terms of people's relationships. All that stuff has been true for thousands of years. And if you go to the well of history and classic, super classic literature, to get informed on those topics, well, you're going to get the best of what has been retained over the past couple thousand years. Whereas if you prefer what is new, again, it's largely unvetted. And, much of it will be selected for its sensationalism, basically grabbing attention because attention is monetized, particularly, on the web. So there's a guy I know, if you watch these videos or if you listen to my podcast, you know of him. His name is John Michael Greer. It irritates me that he likes to comment on popular culture because he doesn't consume any of it. So he'll make statements like about the Marvel superhero movies, which, there are certain things you can say about all of them, but there are certainly differences in quality between them. Consider the differences between Captain America, the Winter Soldier, and Captain Marvel. Those are pretty much the polar opposite extremes for me in terms of Marvel movies and their quality. And what made the Winter Soldier so good, I think, in part anyway, was the fact that the Russo brothers were deliberately referencing and hearkening back to 1970s geopolitical thrillers like The Day of the Jackal. Whereas Captain Marvel is all about this very minute. The obsessions, the political obsessions, the political correctness, the need to punish, to discipline, to shame, the traditional consumers of superhero type media. And, of course, the film had narrative and acting weakness as well, and over-reliance on special effects. But so much of what made it really weak is the fact that it didn't really draw upon, cinematic tradition the way that Captain America, the Winter Soldier did. Actually, I'm going to do a little out-of-sequence editing here. I realized that I brought up John Michael Greer's name and then I got lost in a tangent and I didn't finish the thought. But the thought basically is this, that John Michael Greer not only has a willingness, but an appetite for old books and old writers. And some writers of, books that are no longer contemporary and don't pass muster with the neophile filter, he can just summarize arguments from those books, and the content is so good that lots of people return to his blog week after week to get a taste of it, even though they're not willing to read a book that's 50, 80, 100, 150 years old. I mean, just about the easiest thing for me to do for these videos is to read something fairly short, something that contains 1 or 2 digestible ideas, and then just report that to you, extemporaneously, without notes, just from memory. Because while we probably read more, actual words than we did in the pre-digital age, there's just so much of it is crap. And yet, the bite-sized pieces of crap are, the bar to entry is so low. Of a text message or a tweet or an email. It's just, it doesn't ask much of us in terms of time or concentration. So we default to that sort of stuff and avoid the things that require any commitment at all. So it's easy, or maybe self-serving is a better way to say it, for, a guy in late middle age or middle age. What is 51 these days? I mean, 50 is the new 30, right? It was supposed to be anyway, for a minute. It's kind of self-serving for me to say that older stuff is better. And I'm not saying that older stuff is better. At every time in the past, there was loads and loads of crap. But the intervening years and the attention of people who, like to comb through that old stuff has separated the bullshit and the garbage from the gems. And if you are constantly fixated on the new, particularly in the realm of the news, then you're just subjecting yourself to the constant fire hose treatment, just garbage, 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 garbage. And, maybe there's some benefit, some cognitive benefit in the exercise of trying to find the nuggets of useful information in the torrent of garbage. But it is better, I think, to go to an older, venerated, justified source, justified by, the repeated challenges of critics, of history, of subsequent developments. And I'm largely thinking about this because Alvin Toffler's The Third Wave has come to my attention after, it's been decades since I read it. I read it in the late 80s. And I just watched a review of it that a viewer posted a link to, and that brought back so much of that book came flooding back to me after decades. And because Toffler really was a very careful thinker who took a very long time to put his thoughts together. And I will also say that it was a very long book. I was shocked to see the guy holding the physical book, because I read the physical book, and in my memory it's not that thick. And that's because, the stuff that I remember is a minority of what's actually in there. I remembered the stuff that resonated with me. Earlier today, I was just scrolling through my Audible library and looking at the books in there listed in the order in which I purchased them. So newest first. Airplane. Okay, there are multiple airplanes going over, and they are leaf peepers. These are the, every fall, and the Vermont economy absolutely depends on people from out of state coming here to enjoy the natural beauty of the state. Every fall, busloads and carloads of people from out of state come to look at our beautiful fall foliage. And the ones with the most money, I guess, get to look at it from the air in their privately chartered airplanes. Where was I? Oh yes, my Audible library. So I was scrolling through the things that I had listened to most recently, and I saw a book by Byron Reese called The Fourth Age. And for the life of me, I couldn't remember a thing about it. I couldn't even say what the 4 ages were right offhand. And I started listening to it again, and I listened to just the first, 7-minute introductory chapter. And by the end of that chapter, I had a pretty good idea of what was in the book. But I think I didn't remember it because, unlike some other books that I've talked a lot about in these videos, I don't think I referenced the Fourth Age explicitly, or at least not very often. I don't recall a video devoted to it. And you'll never remember anything as well as something that you learned in order to teach it to somebody else. Not that I'm your teacher, but, explaining something to somebody else. So, I have been delivering the conclusion along the way. There's no greater conclusion that I'm working towards. And I do have a comic strip to get to work on today. I don't know, it's great that I get paid to write and draw a comic strip. It's on a topic that interests me. It involves characters that I enjoy spending time with. I cannot account for the fact that I wait until the last minute and then race to meet the deadline each week. It makes no sense. Anyway, it's time for that process to begin again. I will talk to you again tomorrow. Stay well.